Rather than taking a big textbook, a big long video, we kind of break it down into the key components and map out how all of this information relates. And so this very much matches kind of how the brain stores information. The brain doesn't store a Word document or like a table somewhere in your head. What it stores is a collection of neurons.
Welcome back to Innovating Education. I'm your host, Dr. Riley Williams, and today we're diving into a compelling intersection of mathematics, cognitive science, and edtech innovation. Our guest is Nick Farrenkopf, founder and CEO of Wibly, a platform using interactive knowledge trees to help students build deeper, more flexible understanding, especially in math. These visual structures are grounded in learning science and designed to support a wide range of learners, from those just finding their confidence to those ready to stretch into higher order thinking. We'll unpack how knowledge trees work, what makes them different from other learning tools, and how educators can use them to support students with diverse learning needs. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Excited to be here, and I appreciate you giving me the time to share a little bit about my journey.
Well, could you introduce yourself and share what brought you to this intersection of math education and technology?
Yeah, so hi everybody. My name is Nick Farrenkopf, and I'm here chatting with you today because I love learning. I love everything about it. It's just something that has been such a big part of all the different careers I've had over the years. Probably one of the most favorite careers I've had was being a private tutor for math and science. So I mostly taught the high school, kind of college age, but I did teach some students as young as elementary, some that were adults transitioning careers. So I got a lot of experience with the different styles of learning. And across all of that, I think my most favorite part of everything was that light bulb moment, that aha moment when everything sort of just kind of clicks in your head and you see like the eyes of the student light up, they get all excited. I think that's really one of the biggest things that has driven me towards this idea of teaching and helping others learn. So I did that for a while, but ended up wanting something a little bit more, a little bit bigger. So I ended up getting a job in software because I discovered machine learning as a field. I love AI. AI is such an exciting time to be in. There's so many complexities to it. There's so many ways to kind of build it out. I think one of the things that I still missed when I was in software was this idea of teaching, of helping students learn. So it wasn't until after I moved on from that career that I discovered entrepreneurship. I discovered that idea that I can take my favorite parts of tutoring and software, and so I stitched them together. I took all my fun experiences as a tutor and built a learning platform, and that's kind of what brought me here today.
So for our listeners, what exactly are knowledge trees? How do they work? And what kinds of challenges in K through 12 math are they trying to solve?
Yeah, great question. This is definitely something that I get a lot, because knowledge trees aren't a super common way to teach, but I think they're going to be a lot more common moving forward. So knowledge trees are kind of like a visual map of the core ideas for something. Rather than taking a big textbook, a big long video, we kind of break it down into the key components and map out how all of this information relates. And so this very much matches kind of how the brain stores information. The brain doesn't store a Word document or like a table somewhere in your head. What it stores is a collection of neurons. So these tiny little nodes that represent a single thing. And really what the brain is this giant pathway of all these different interconnecting neurons. And so that's where a lot of this idea of knowledge trees comes from. So I think a good example that I like to start people out with is talking about food. Everybody loves food. So a blueberry is a type of berry, a berry is a type of fruit, and a fruit is a type of food. So we have this kind of linear order where one thing comes or is an example of another, and you can kind of build that out into a kind of structured path. But the thing is that information isn't that linear. That doesn't encompass everything. You could talk about blueberries being blue. They are an antioxidant. They are spherical. And in that case, there's not really one property, one description that is really before the other. Blue doesn't come before sphere. So that's where kind of knowledge trees kind of come into play, is complex information and finding a way to connect it together in a way that really represents how information is stored in the brain or within life. And I think in K-12 math specifically, this is when we start applying this same idea to all of these different concepts you're going to learn in math. The ideas that you learn in math are not singular. You don't use it just in algebra, just in geometry. Something that you learn in division might apply to equations or to derivatives. If you're learning proportions, you could be talking about fractions or in triangles. There's so many different things. And a lot of students tend to treat math as very siloed. And one of the things we're trying to do with knowledge trees is to show you that it really is just the start to lead to something so much bigger.
So, how would you compare knowledge trees to concept maps or learning progressions? What pedagogical distinctions are you intentionally making in their design?
Yeah, so I think for me, concept maps, knowledge maps, mind maps, they're all kind of the same idea. There are some small nuanced differences between them where you kind of change the type of information you're looking to explore. Concepts or concept maps deal with very specific ideas, where mind maps, whatever the author wants to create, can kind of go into this collection of different ideas. I like to call them knowledge trees or knowledge maps because knowledge I look at as something that's impactful. There's so much information out there. There's so many different pieces of detail that you could add to help describe something, but not everything is helpful for the learning process. So a core idea behind kind of tracking the knowledge behind all these different topics is to help give you that baseline, which you can then add all those extra details on later. If we talk about learning progressions, I think one of the biggest things between knowledge maps and kind of standard learning progressions is how linear is it? So when you're talking about a textbook, a video, there's a very specific order in which the concepts are shared. But as we kind of learned with the blueberry example, that's not the best way to kind of organize that information. There's very specific paths that you can go down. And I think for knowledge trees, that exploration is a really important aspect. So being able to kind of explore the different concepts, explore how they relate, and that's really where knowledge trees are a lot different than standard learning materials. You don't really explore a textbook, you read a textbook. You don't explore a video, you watch a video. So knowledge maps come in that allow you to really give you something to explore, to kind of discover how things relate in a way that makes it a little bit more fun.
Well, I'd really like to get into the science behind all of this. Working memory is often a constraint in math learning, especially for our students with ADHD and dyslexia. How do knowledge trees help reduce cognitive overload?
Great question. So I love this type because that's where really these knowledge trees really start to shine. I think there are kind of three different topics that I always like to focus on. For one, knowledge trees are a lot less language intensive. So a lot of learning materials today, like especially textbooks, are a lot of really big sentences, really big paragraphs. And you have to know how to interpret that language before you can even start to get an idea of what it's talking about and how it all relates together. So knowledge maps help to reduce that overload where you're not really worrying so much about the language between everything. You're really focused on the core ideas behind it. Another key aspect of knowledge trees that help to reduce that overload is really when it deals with short-term memory. So with short-term memory, there's this idea that you have about 7 different items that you can keep track of at one particular time. And so some situations you have a little more, some you have a little less. But when it comes to learning something new, you never have room for 7 new ideas. You might have room for 2 or 3 ideas. And once you start introducing more than that, that's when you start getting overloaded with all that extra information. So a really cool aspect of knowledge trees is that it helps provide you kind of like that extra memory by showing, okay, here are all the different things you're learning about. We're just going to focus on this for right now, but all of these things are still here on the map. They're still here in your peripheral. If you want to jump to this real quick, remember what it is, and then jump back to what you're learning before. You have that flexibility to not be as overwhelmed. And then I think probably the third part that a lot of students get overwhelmed with is the amount of information that is shown to the student at one time. If we're dealing with textbooks, if we're dealing with videos, they have to show you all of the details in a very small chunk of time. So it's generally a very dense piece of information for some learner to go explore. The cool thing about knowledge trees is we can kind of work on that layer by layer. So we can show you the basic concepts at the start and then say, okay, once you have all these down, okay, now we'll show you all the intermediate concepts as well. We have the ability to kind of break this apart into the key components to make it a very iterative approach to learning where you can build on top of each other.
I mean, that's just a game changer for our ESL students, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, are knowledge trees designed to reflect a constructivist learning model where students build understanding through exploring the relationships?
Absolutely. So one of the things I really like about knowledge trees is the idea that we can help students approach all of this content in a way that makes sense to them, building these connections over time. By mapping all of these concepts, you have a variety of different paths you can take. And you don't necessarily want to explore every path at the same time. You might want to start in path one. Okay, I've explored this a little bit, come back, I'll go explore path two. And this kind of relates back to that idea of how the brain processes and stores this information over time. It's not here's part A, here's part B, you connect it and you're done. The brain works about building these pathways over time. You travel A to B once, okay, the connection is there, but it's a little faint. You travel along that path several more times, okay, it starts to get a little bit stronger. And so the brain itself really works by repeating these paths over time. This is why you need to reread information. This is why, muscle memory is a thing. It's this idea that this kind of repeated approach where you learn a little bit, let it settle, learn a little bit more, settle again. And you build it over time instead of trying to approach everything, in one chunk. With with knowledge trees in particular, giving that visual to see how all those paths are built I think is a very big component of why this kind of visual experience helps. Because if you don't have that visual, you have to do this entirely in your head. You have to build these things, you have to envision it, and that's very difficult for a lot of students. So I think knowledge trees are a really cool way of taking that and giving you that alternative path so that you can decide that, okay, let's go build on this first, we'll build on this second, build on this later. It makes it super easy to see.
So, how do you balance exploration with guidance? How much freedom do students have in navigating the tree, and what's the role of teacher facilitation?
Mhm. Great question. Because I think exploration is really key for enjoying the learning. It's key for understanding where discovery comes into play, where curiosity is kind of fueled from. I think that's something that's missing from a lot of standard education scenarios nowadays. So exploration is a very important part, but I think guidance is another vitally key part for getting there in time. People lead very busy lives nowadays. There's always something else to do. There's always something else to learn. So as much as someone wants to just kind of sit and learn about things all day, it's not something that is very feasible. Knowledge trees give students the freedom to explore at their own pace, to kind of discover their own gaps in knowledge by providing this sort of exploration-based background. And then the teacher comes in, what they facilitate is kind of the bounds of what the student is learning. If they're in a intro geometry class, you only need to really explore 2D shapes and maybe explore a couple 3D shapes. You don't need to know anything about 4D. So knowing what concepts a student really is interested in or needs to focus on and kind of paring it down to help them give a map that grows over time, I think is where a lot of teacher facilitation comes into play.
So, can knowledge trees help make abstract math more concrete, especially for our visual or spatial learners?
Absolutely. So I think knowledge trees are so good for that specific reason. I think math especially gets increasingly abstract as you get further along. It's very easy to visualize a circle and maybe visualize the area of a circle. But if we start talking about equations or exponents, it's very difficult to think about these things because they don't exactly exist outside of math. They're really a more abstract way of measuring how things are related. And so when students get to a lot of these more complex topics in math, these more abstract ideas, it becomes very difficult because this is not really something that you see in other topics. In a lot of these other topics, you have things you can play around with. You have pictures, you have videos of what happened in the past. Like these are things that are very, very clear and very concrete. But when it comes to math, because it's more about the relationship between different things, it changes based on whatever student is learning. Some students might like soccer and use that to measure kind of how a ball moves through space. Or they like pool and they can use that to measure, how things bounce around. So with math, I think in particular, it's very specific to the student, where each student wants their own kind of type of explanation or example. And so when you're a teacher, that's very difficult because every student is different and there's just so much to manage. But with knowledge trees, we give them that baseline that says, this is what you're going to be learning as part of your class. This is all that abstract information that you would have to kind of play around with in your head. But hey, we'll build it out for you. And all you have to do is focus on the connections. You have to understand what each of the different parts are and how to get from one to the other. And then you can learn math a lot easier.
What have you observed about learner engagement? Are students more motivated or confident when using these types of tools?
Yeah, so we actually ran a pilot program with some students. I think one of the big things that we asked was, how confident would you feel teaching yourself math? And I think that's something that a lot of people initially, a lot of these students had a very hard time with. Like without that sort of guidance, it's very difficult for them to jump into something that's very abstract. But with knowledge trees and being able to explore them, explore all the concepts behind math, visualize what they're learning, they become a lot more confident in that idea. And I think one of the big reasons behind that, again, is that idea of exploration and discovery. When a student is having fun learning, they're a lot more engaged, they're a lot more self driven. And I think that's where a lot of this kind of motivation comes from. It's with knowledge trees. You can kind of help show the students how to learn, give them this framework saying, hey, this is how all these different algebra concepts are related. But that same idea applies to geometry. You can, again, take that idea of, okay, this is how I connect ideas. We're just, talking about shapes instead of equations. That idea that learners have the ability to gain more control over what they're learning and how they're learning, I think is a lot of the reason why students are really picking up on knowledge trees today.
Let's talk a little bit about Wibly. What is Wibly as a platform, and how are educators and students using it in real classrooms?
Yeah. So Wibly is kind of like a helpful study tool. So it's not just talking about assessments, it's not just videos, it's not just descriptions of things. It's a way to help you organize your thoughts. And I think that's something that a lot of students are missing nowadays, where you can take notes on a pad, you can take notes as part of like a video, but kind of connecting them all together, seeing what the bigger picture is something that's very difficult kind of on your own. So Wibly as a platform helps you to kind of organize all that information together and showcase it in a way that allows you to really jump through it very easily. And so classrooms is something that we are definitely preparing for. I think right now we're focused a little bit more on more niche learning scenarios like tutoring, when we're covering specific topics or specific concepts. So what we're doing with Wibly is we're working with some of these kind of educational or content providers to map out their own content using knowledge trees. So whether it's talking about algebra or relating some of that information to more of like the personal finance, students can see how all of these different concepts relate and how they connect to other math and math adjacent topics. And so one of the things we're really building out is, okay, we have that same idea for one set of topics. Let's build it out to cover all the different topics. So one of the things that we're currently adding is this idea of knowledge checks. So can you remember what a particular term is? can you reason why a relationship might exist? These are very important for checking whether or not a student has learned something, but they shouldn't always be, in my opinion, this is a totally other, different topic, but shouldn't be the most important thing for whether or not you have learned. And so with this idea of using knowledge checks and knowledge trees, then we can start to build this visual map of how students are progressing throughout their classroom. A student can answer a couple questions on scalene and isosceles and equilateral. Okay, cool. They start to understand triangles. But if we start to cover triangles and they answer a lot of questions on quadrilaterals, cool. Now they're starting to learn more about polygons. So it's this layer of information that kind of builds on itself to provide the teacher a lot more specific kind of data-driven analytics in a visual tool that allows them to very easily see, okay, some of these students are covering, I don't know, exponent equations very well, but they're struggling to learn with logs. And so maybe focus that a little bit more. So by giving the teacher more flexibility and ease of kind of visual student aggregation, I think is definitely a direction that we're headed for Wibly to make the teacher's life a little bit easier.
Are there particular grade levels, math strands, or learner profiles where Wibly really seems to be effective?
Yeah, so if we're talking about grade levels, I think when students have to kind of teach themselves is really where Wibly starts to shine. So I think that really kind of starts in middle school, high school, where students then have to kind of learn some of these concepts on their own. Like this is definitely something you see at the college and like the adult learning level, where the professor's there for a little bit, but a lot of the learning is kind of on your own. And so when we're talking about kind of grade levels, whenever you start to have to learn by yourself is where Wibly really starts to shine. We're talking about kind of like the math topics. And again, it's like the middle school level where math starts to get really abstract, where it becomes a lot more difficult to kind of visualize, internalize, or see all of these different equation concepts. And so Wibly really shines by giving that sort of visual interpretation that a student can then take with them throughout all the rest of their class. And then if we're talking about learner profiles, I think one of the biggest points of traction that we've had is around neurodiverse learners. So a lot of times this deals with like specifically ADHD or dyslexic students, that struggle with the traditional type of learning materials. Well, Wibly provides them a very visual, kind of spatial way to explore that information in a completely new light, in a completely new way that focuses a lot more on the relationships and how ideas connect, giving them that framework, and then helping them kind of fill in all those details on top of it.
That's exciting stuff. That is exciting. So, before we wrap up, do you have any final insights or encouragements that you'd like to offer educators who are trying to make math more engaging and accessible for all of our learners?
Yeah, I think there are two things that kind of jump out to me. So, for one, I think technology is absolutely key. I think technology is here to stay. It's integrated in so many parts of our society. And I think it provides so many capabilities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Back when I was a tutor, one of the things I used to do was I would draw these kind of diagrams on paper to give students kind of this example of knowledge trees, saying, hey, when you're taking this assessment, all of these questions are for this type of integral, these questions are these other type, and they're like these other types are something you're probably going to be learning next. So drawing that out on pencil and paper is a lot of work. But with technology, we have the ability to streamline that so quickly. We take that same idea, apply it to a different set of topics, apply it to science, apply it to language arts. There's so many different ways, and the younger generation is so dependent on technology today. So I'm a big proponent of giving them a way to kind of handle and learn how to use technology in an efficient and functional way. I think it's so important. But I think my other big take is that AI isn't here to take your job. AI is here to streamline it. I think teaching is so much more of an art than it is a science. I think a lot of times AI is really good at the science part. If you like zoom in and focus on just this one aspect, AI can do a great job. But I think a lot of the problem is when you start to zoom out, students are so different. They have different backgrounds, they have different learning styles. And that's not something that AI, I think, is going to be able to adapt to very quickly. That's going to be a long time before AI can start handling the art aspect of it. So I think definitely embrace AI. Like, it's here to make your job easier. Finding out how to do it correctly, I think, is a little bit up for debate. I think plan for using it in the future, absolutely.
And for our listeners who want to learn more about Wibly, where can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so anybody who wants to learn more about Wibly, feel free to reach out to me through any of our social media platforms, through LinkedIn. You can send me an email, I'll always respond to them. Or you can visit our website at Wibly, Wibly.co. And there you can join the waitlist, or we're launching a lot of new stuff at the start of the next school year. So it should be a fun rest of the 2025.
Awesome. For our listeners, I'm going to link that in our description. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and tuning in. We are proud to be supported by the Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like this possible. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with fellow educators so we can keep bringing these conversations. Until next time, keep learning, keep innovating. Nick, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It was fun to share my story, hoping that it can help some of you learn.